three more patterns then that may turn up on a transformative action unlearning pathway. In this case, I'm thinking about a pattern that's hard to name but has to do with emergence. So that's what I'm going to call it, emergence. And it has this sort of characteristic that we may be working quite happily on a project at this level, and as we're working on this project, of course, it is changing the circumstances around us. So every time we make a move and we're active in the world, we're changing the world in some way. And the shift that's taking place in, I'd call this the context, might reveal to us that actually we're doing the wrong project. There's a deeper project that needs doing, which only becomes visible because we've spent time doing this other project. So it's necessary to make quite a significant shift. We shift in level, perhaps become much more strategic, and meanwhile work on another project that might be quite different from the one we worked at in the first place. I'll give you an example of this. One of my early projects in the permaculture world was to spend time looking at soil reconditioning, particularly using non-tillage implements to create deep soils in the farm conditions that I was working in. And actually it turned out that before this project, or at least what happened, what emerged as this project proceeded, was that people wouldn't do this type of soil reconditioning work unless they had a secure tenancy or secure ownership of the land, which was in England at the time was very difficult, still is. So the project shifted from soil reconditioning to looking at land rights and tenancy agreements. So the first project revealed the need for the second project, and the second project needed to be worked on substantially before the first project could really be successful. So this, being aware of the possibility that this might be what's going on, that we might be working on what we think is the core project, only to discover that something else is at the core, is worth knowing about. The next one is a contingency pattern. Or another way of thinking about it is that it's a life happens pattern. So there we go, we're traveling along our pathway with a good sense of purpose, lots of good intent and so on, and then whoa, life happens. There's a new baby in the family. A large storm wipes out one of our buildings somewhere. Something on a contingency scale happens, and this disturbs us for a period of time. So there might be a time factor in here where we wait for normal life to resume, and then we can continue on after that. A couple of things that we might say about this is that in the Gaia University context, it's completely possible to think that the contingency is part of your transformative action learning pathway. So if you have the attention for it, you can transfer the contingency into the pathway in a very conscious way. It may be actually that the contingency, and I'm thinking here of Ben in the Virgin Islands, who halfway through his first year with Gaia University, his island was hit by a hurricane, and so the farm needed a lot of attention because of that. In those circumstances, it's unlikely that a person might have attention to be fully engaged in their program. However, it is possible to do minimal documentation which that you can later use to fold back into your documented pathway with Gaia University. So I would encourage us to think of these contingencies as being opportunities for carrying on, as it were, but carrying on in a different activity than that one you had planned. Part of our logic of creating a very flexible pause and program pause policy is to allow you and us to manage our time realistically according to what's going on in the way of contingencies. We don't want to be feeling as though it's necessary to meet the deadline if indeed you've broken your leg and all hell has let loose in some other way in your life. So, contingency, the life happens pattern. Then the last one we'll pay attention to is sometimes known as the tangle, or the knot. That's not as in ropes. Knot. Okay. This is a really tricky pattern to deal with, and it looks a bit like we've been proceeding along and then something happens which knocks us off our ability to function well, and we get caught up in some knot that feels quite difficult to deal with. This is much more a feelings pattern than perhaps any of the others. This is a pattern which has to do with the almost universal issue of isolation that we all face. You know, all of us in our backgrounds have been obliged to deal with very difficult situations without enough support and backup in the past, and sometimes that would have been true for us in our early lives, and consequently we may have an isolation pattern. I know I've got one, and the way it works is that first of all I feel like I'm struggling on my own to do something really difficult and I can't get anybody to help me. Then I get quite bad-tempered and somebody offers to help and I go, no thank you, I can do this myself, go away, go away, go away, which pushes me further into my isolation, and you can see how this sort of knotty type of downward spiral can develop here. So this is a pattern that we need to be alert to, and as individuals, as learners ourselves, unlearners and learners ourselves, we need to be able to spot when we've gone into this self-reinforcing isolation pattern as early as possible, so that we then reach out before we're really stuck in the pattern. So we reach out early enough before the emotional feelings have become so strong that we push everybody away. So that's the tangle or knot pattern. Okay. So I think the last thing that I want to say about all of these patterns is, well, you remember that I said this is not a complete list. There will be more, and I look forward to you describing some of the patterns that happen for you, and we'll put them into the collection. Okay. The last thing I want to say is that there's something in here about the idea of contradiction. So by this I mean it's not possible to be prescriptive and say in this set of circumstances a person needs to do this or that, because it will be very much dependent on what your normal way of dealing with things are. So if for example you have a, let's look at this one to do with mistakes. If you have a pattern that says it's absolutely essential that I never make a mistake, then one will go through life in avoiding risks be risk averse, as it were. In those circumstances, a person would be well advised to step up the level of risk taking, okay, and deal with the feelings that come up. So deal with the feelings of terror so that it becomes more and more possible to take risks. We would say, by risks I mean risks which are calculated risks, not risks which are merely foolhardy. So I'm not encouraging us to be reckless here, but I am encouraging us to have a healthy attitude towards taking risks. Okay. So the reverse would also be true, that if our pattern is to be reckless and self-damaging and to take risks left, right and centre which are bound to come out badly, in this with that sort of background, we would be seeking to take less risks and be more thoughtful about how we did our analysis, maybe in this place and so on. So I want you to understand clearly that how each of us deals with these patterns is partly dependent on the underlying way we think about these things on a very personal level. So a good part of your support network is to do with helping you move through these patterns, to recognize when they turn up and have some idea of what to do with them, and we'll be thinking significantly about our support networks in the next part of the element here. So thanks again for listening, and look forward to the webinar when we can talk about these things.